Welcome back, you beautiful people. Today we have our final part of the Generational Trauma series, talking about why Monster Hunter sucks now. Now, if you haven't seen the first and second part, things might be a little bit out of context whenever we get into the meat of the video. I would encourage you to go back and listen to them, but it's not mandatory. If you have already listened to them, welcome back. We've got MH United, also known as Alpha here, and we are going to get right back into it. Let's see what Mazereon has to say even more.
To Diablos or Fatalis in Monster Hunter Freedom, where you either needed to position yourself well, block, or take armor skills to avoid getting crushed by a belly flop or screamclaw. And then there's the bunch.
Now, Screamclaw, that's specifically like getting roared into and hit.
Into like a claw attack, but there's specifically, I'm pretty certain it's talking about Fatalis. So Fatalis, if you're like right in front of him, will do a claw swipe. His roar also has, it's almost like Diablos levels of stun. It's rough.
Okay.
Non-damage statuses that were removed or toned down significantly. Wind pressure and Quake are the big two here. Yeah, some creatures can quake, but it's not common, and almost nothing wind presses you anymore unless you're having tea under a wind while it lands. It's yet another example of how subtle player skills like positioning are being diminished. And then there's the broken hitboxes. Yes, they are annoying in older games, but unless you're a bit slow, you quickly learn that the visual model doesn't always sync with the hitbox, but the hitboxes are consistent, so you adjust.
I know we touched on that a little bit in like even my experience with Monoblos that I described, where like...
Yeah, again, I think it's just interesting where players are like, for me, when I talk about hitboxes, like it's acceptable for Mizitsune when you're blast dashing or wire bugging around to have massive hitboxes when you're above it and it's doing its moves that are clearly only hitting the ground, but it's, for some people it's unacceptable that I don't know, Tigrex has like slightly more of a hitbox to the left and right of its charge sometimes, depending on size model.
Yeah.
And again, it's all when dealing with those hitboxes. Like, I get it. If you just failed a quest, you're frustrated. You know, it's not for me, it's never really been the end of the world.
Some of those shit boxes are present in New Gen too. Like the Anjanath flamethrower is infamous for it. People don't talk about it very often, but the Rajang and Furious Rajang beam actually has the same like problem where it doesn't show.
I've seen some questionable flamethrowers from Fatalis even.
Yeah.
And it's like, yeah, you got hit by that, and yeah, you can be frustrated about it at the moment, but like, does it really kill the fight? I mean, you were cutting things close anyway.
And then you also have funny anecdote playing Sunbreak Anomaly quests. Apex Zenogre's in there. It was a one feint. My buddy had forgotten that Apex Zenogre has a shitbox with his with one of his backflips. And he does the backflip and he's in front of the Zenogre. So like he doesn't get hit by the tail, but because he was in front of the Zenogre's head, he got hit with the full damage and died.
Yeah. And it's also just hard because again, I mostly blame it on an animation and a like attack communication standpoint, because if you look at Utduna, when it does the body slam, it's active from when it launches itself in the air.
Yeah.
And you're like, wait, why? So yeah, no, I mean, you can encounter the thing is usually there's a larger variety of attacks and a larger variety of hunts in the modern titles than there were in like Gen 1. Because a lot of monsters that share a similar skeleton in Gen 1 will share a handful of similar attacks. And so you'll be encountering those cases more frequently. But again, I don't necessarily mind it. But I also started in Gen 2, so...
That makes sense, yeah, that checks out. Alright.
People complain about Plesioth as a big offender, and it sure is a good example of how you're getting hit when it looks like you should be safe. But that said, you should learn pretty fast when not to stand, and that it only ever hits in one direction, being right. So if you hit its left leg, you're safe, even if you can't roll through the hip check. Updating the hitboxes to fit the models is a good idea. You'd be foolish to argue it's a step backwards. But the problem is not that hitboxes now sync to the visual model, it's that they overcompensate it. Many attacks that should hit you leave you mysteriously unscathed, and because the rolling and vulnerability frames are extended, you can roll through essentially everything. Investing 10 points into evade, which is possible from a single charm, makes you invincible as long as you're not mentally comatose.
Now, is that true where there's like reverse hitboxes?
So there's some hitboxes that it's an attack communication thing. I guess Zinogre would be a good example. It's hard for me to come up with one like off the top of my head, like a specific attack. But there will be like a charge and then like a slide after the charge. And sometimes that slide doesn't have a hitbox, sometimes it does. There's times where like very clearly a paw will step on you and like during a running animation and you're just fine. I'm specifically talking about 3rd gen. I mean, there's also attacks in Wilds where like the attack isn't active, or like in newer games in general, where the attack isn't active till a certain point in its animation. There are other times where like Tigrex will charge, right? And Tigrex in Iceborne kind of does this weird pull back and then lunge forward, and he floats a little bit above the ground. And the attack is very clearly communicating that there's just going to be this flat hitbox along the ground. But because he does this animation where he's off the ground, you're like, well, maybe I can sneak under him. And then it looks like you snuck under him, but you didn't sneak under him. Like it's on like a per creature basis and per attack basis. I can't say there's not very many attacks where I'm like, wow, I thought that would linger longer and it didn't linger longer in 2nd gen, but there's a few in 3rd where I'm like, wait, why isn't this as large of an attack? But again, that's more of like it's hard to demonstrate that or come up with a feeling for that, especially when that's going to vary depending on monster size. And it's one of the things that I don't think a lot of players respect when they're playing most of the games in general. There are times when a monster is so large that most of its attacks are going to miss you, and that's going to lead to a totally different experience or hit you because they're so large. And same thing when they're small, when they're condensing those hitboxes. Rajang's one of my 2nd gen Rajang in particular is one of my favorite examples of this, because fighting a smaller Rajang means it's much easier to dodge to the side of him when he's doing his side hops or his forward charge. But if he pulls out the punches, there's no wiggle room. I have to iframe the fists because there's no space in between the fists as he's swinging them. Whereas when he's larger, there's a bunch of space in between the fists, but now all of a sudden the side hops cover a whole lot more distance, and there's a whole bigger distance between like the optimal hit zone of hitting the head and getting to the arm. And same thing with like getting lightly bumped. It's a lot easier to get lightly bumped on a larger Rajang, but a lot harder to get lightly bumped on a smaller Rajang. So in terms of, I don't envy the devs, is I guess the short of it.
Yeah.
In terms of figuring out what's appropriate, what's not appropriate. Same thing with multi-hit moves. Like I would describe attacks as 4 things: being a non-damaging like status condition type attack, being a single hit attack, being a multi-stage attack, and being a multi-hit attack, and how they determine what's multi-stage and multi-hit. And it matters for, like, let's say Rocksteady Mantle. So a move that's multi-stage is a move that has a very long lasting hitbox and has multiple parts to it. The best multi-stage off the top of my head would be something like, I know I just brought up Rajang, but probably Rajang's double hops, where he snaps his head back after hopping. And in some games, that's a multi-hit. Some games, it's a multi-stage where he's just snapping back and you don't get hit. There's other times where, like in 4 Ultimate, he'll snap back and suddenly you take the full damage, you know?
Oh, okay, that's handy to know.
So again, it's really a communication issue or a communication problem for the devs to solve. Whether or not a monster is in the preparation stage, it's preparing something, it's ending something, how far does it reach? Again, this is why I don't think it's particularly easy to talk about difficulty and to talk about hitboxes, because my standards for what's acceptable and what's not acceptable is going to be very different from somebody else in terms of like, hey, I really should have gotten hit there, and I really shouldn't have gotten hit there. And yeah.
It's definitely fun, like, hearing you recount all of this, because, like I said, you know, new gen, this is just foreign. You know, like,
yeah, I
like,
mean, but there's some
like
things that
shit
you
boxes, but
yeah, there are some spots where you do encounter them, but yeah, it's certainly not nearly as prevalent as it would be in Gen 1 and Gen 2. And again, Maze is a PlayStation portable player primarily, so he's going to encounter worse instances of it because the PlayStation Portable had limitations. It's not to say that like you aren't going to encounter any of it on the PS2 games. You are, but you're not going to encounter as many of them or as many instances of of things being slightly out of place.
That makes sense. Yeah.
My advice again, whenever somebody is dealing with a hitbox that they're like, wow, that shouldn't have hit me, is like, okay, well, play around with it a little bit and just pretend the animation covers that spot. That they're not. A lot of people will say they're deal breakers. For me, they're really not. So.
Yeah. Well, you know, it's because you got that old head and you ran.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and again, I don't blame people for lumping that in as, hey, this is part of the reason that old gen is more difficult. Like, it is something that you will have to factor when playing old gen.
Yeah.
It is a factor of its difficulty. I don't think it defines its difficulty. But
It's
then
just
again,
part of it.
Again, they're my favorite games in the series, and I played way too much, like way too much of first and second. Well, I'm mostly second gen. I need to play more first gen. Yeah.
No, to bring it back to the Maze video, I know we've been mostly talking about the hitboxes and everything. I like how he talks about fitting evasion in. You basically are unhittable unless you're comatose in the brain.
You can tell why like people were mad like when he posted this.
I think the pinned comments like elitist dog or something like that. Like,
oh, I think that's one of his friends, but yeah, no, but that was the kind of reception that he was getting, was like, dang, he's calling me a loser for like gen.
Well, like that's the whole thing, right? Like the whole concept of new Wilds players and new Rise players, or even like some people during World are like, oh, I get it, I played the baby game and I'm not good, whatever. It's like you guys are dicks. You know?
Well, it's like this conversation that we have constantly. It was a conversation from when I started of, are you really a veteran? Are you a veteran? You know, what does veteran mean? Why does veteran matter? And we always have this like, oh, you're just a greenhorn who doesn't know much and hasn't really struggled. Yeah, the back in my day sort of.
Back in my day. Yeah.
You have to earn your stripes sort of mentality that I'm sure there was probably a point where I participated in it when I was younger, but like it's such a silly talking point. But it's persisted, you know.
Yeah. Well, I
can find it.
I pointed this out in a different video at one point. I was like, you know, people that started in 3U, at this point, the people that started in World, they've actually spent more time in the series than the people that had played it at 3U did on World's launch. And so like 3U and 4U players were calling themselves veterans. But people will look at a World player even to this day, if they call themselves a veteran, they'll look at them funny.
And again, it operates under a lot of assumptions. Like, yeah, you can have started in a previous title before I started. But if I go back and play it to the same amount, does that still make you more experience? Like,
Yeah, true.
how much did you engage with the game? Like, did you get hard carried by a friend? Because you can, and that's a perfectly legitimate way to experience the games, but that's going to result in a different level of understanding of the games, you know, and a different type of expertise. Like, you might be like cracked with your friend who is also carrying you and have amazing synergy with them, but like be utterly terrible at soloing anything. And vice versa. You can be great at soloing. This is why we talk about, like, we have so many conversations of this dang longsword player is tripping me all the time. I don't know. It's players like to one up each other all the time, but it very rarely is there. It doesn't tell me a whole lot about them other than the fact that they want to one up each other.
Yeah. Yeah. Because at this point, like, I've seen all sorts of, like, even amongst veterans, there's such like polarizing disagreement. Like, you'll have people that are like, yeah, 3U and 4U low rank and high rank hub were just as easy as like new gen. And it's like, at first I was like, I don't know about that. Like, that sounds kind of, you know, off. Like, I've heard other people say that, you know, new gen is way easier, and like just looking at old gen stuff, like, it looks way harder. But playing through 4U right now, and having already played through GU as well, I can't say that my experience with 4U's low rank hub and so far in high rank hub isn't very different than how easy I went through World, Rise, or Wilds.
That's where it's again really hard for me.
Well, not hub, I meant village. I meant village.
Yeah, I gotcha. I mean, the villages are, in general, are fairly, they're tailored to be fairly easy on the, I know it's weird calling for a portable title or a handheld title, even though it's a numbered game, but it's a lot closer to like something like 3U than it is to something like Monsterhunter Tri or Monsterhunter 2 in the way that they've structured and balanced things. The village is meant to be a tutorial and meant to be very friendly to solo. And that's not a bad thing. It's just a very different balancing philosophy. It's not to say that village is harder than hub in the PS2 games, but it's also the difference in scaling of numbers and that sort of thing. There's a very big night and day difference, I think, between like a village in a portable game and the early hub experience in a console game. And again, that's because they were expecting you to be with players for the most part. Not to say that would be wrong to solo through, like I did, but it's just gonna be different. What was the other thing I was gonna bring up? I'm forgetting. Yeah, so it's hard for me to evaluate any of the difficulty of the games because my experience with the games is constantly changing, but I am not I don't know what it would be like to be a beginner in 3rd and 4th gen. I mean, aside from Tri, because I'm already coming in with outside knowledge, and I could see some, like, for me, yeah, I could see somebody both making the argument that it's about as easy and somebody making the argument that it's about as hard. I don't know where I would necessarily rank them relative to each other. And again, what stage in the game we're talking about. It's just they require different considerations when you're playing through them. There's more things that I already knew about, like, again, roar stuns and what types of CC I'll encounter when I was playing through 4th gen that I didn't know when I was playing through 5th gen. But I also have now played enough through 5th gen that it's not a surprise to me. And 5th gen gets easier now that I have more experience with it. I mean, that's why we always end up in these. We see a lot of people who are like, in new game too easy. It's because we have a start of a new audience whose first game has concluded and they're moving on to a second game. And that's not to say that they might be right. There might be some elements that are easier than their game, but they're also only just now for the first time experiencing a new game while having had experience. So I don't know that I would call them reliable. Yeah, having a standard for the overall difficulty, like Wild's difficulty gets brought up a lot as being really, really easy. If you try crafting everything, you'll fight the monsters a lot, and you'll find that they have some really unique stuff up their sleeves. Yes, they have lower HP, but you do them enough times. I have play enough of Monster Hunter and you'll cart to everything.
Yeah, true. Especially like whenever I find I was actually having this discussion with someone else the other day, and we were discussing like the concept of carting and being proud of not carting. And it's like when you first like start playing and before you get really good or get decent, you may play like extra defensively and it works out in your favor because you don't cart, but you naturally spend longer times in hunts. You naturally don't learn the monster as well because you're just kind of hitting your head against it, but you're playing really passively. A lot of speedrunners would say call it cowardly play, funny enough. And sure, you might not cart, but you're also not good still. And
yeah, again, that's where like it's hard to evaluate the challenge from that angle too. Like, again, having a monster cart you when you have anywhere between 3 to 5 carts, or in like if you're doing Fatalis Urgent, it's more than that. Like, yeah, sure, you're getting closer to a failure condition, but are you getting more comfortable with the monster in terms of slaying it faster and getting further away from the failure condition that it's timing out? Yeah, it's just hard to definitively say one way or the other, at least for me. I'm sure somebody would be like, yeah, I'm gonna claim something's more difficult or something's less difficult. It's just based on how I feel about it, and they're perfectly allowed to do so.
yeah,
it's just interesting.
well, it goes into that level of looking back on how much I've improved over the series, and like from an introspective way. In base world, I wasn't good, and I like slotted things in to cover my weaknesses. I found that I would only cart if I got stunned, so I slotted in stun res, had health boost, like all these different things. And I was first trying AT Elder Dragons when they were coming out, and I wasn't carting, and I felt like I was, king of the castle, but I didn't even know how to play IG right. Like looking back at the time period. And I wouldn't know how to play like IG in an optimal way until I watched a Pochi speedrun. And I didn't know how to like build completely properly or like in a way that was more efficient and not like have redundant defensive skills and things like that.
And then finding out which of the defensive skills are the most valuable too.
Yeah, exactly. And like, so in every single aspect I have improved greatly, and I find that I cart now more than I did back then because I play more comfortably and sometimes more recklessly because of that. But I can easily recognize that I play better.
It's also how you, in my opinion, failure is how you grow as a player. Like challenging, pushing things to their limits, and challenging a monster while it's attacking it lets you be a bit more experimental. It lets you see what you can and can't do. It's not to say that like playing passively is wrong and like you haven't beaten the game until you've done those things, but there's a skill that you slowly develop by quote unquote risking things. It's a video game. You're not really losing much outside of time.
Yeah. And even if you cart once, you're not in any danger of failing the quest, because you got 2 more lives. 3 if you got insurance.
Provided you're not, and then 4 if you have safeguard. Yeah, it's something that I encourage with I've got a good chunk of players who have started in 5th gen and a few have started in 6th gen. And yeah, I try to encourage them to number one, learn from other players and see what the nice part about speedruns is you can look at the top end of people who are like trying to push their time down and see what things are effective and what sorts of play styles they adopt, but also just to actually engage with the build system a little bit more and to actually recognize what you're doing when you're putting on things.
Yeah. Well, back to the maze video. We keep getting little side tangents, but I feel like they're productive.
If I have to pick between the 2 big divides here, 1st or 2nd generation hitboxes, or 3rd and 4th, I pick the former. Hitboxes were generally tight, with the exceptions of some tail whips, some foot trip damage, and some hip checks, and even those were not that bad, and certainly not as bad as 3rd generation players like to complain. Personally, I'd rather be taken out for being careless, rather than be careless and have nothing happen when it ought to. Let's talk about the final bosses of the games for a second to further illustrate that point about risk and reward from earlier. The final boss of Monster Hunter Freedom is Crimson Fatalis, and if you fought it in 1st generation, you'll know that it does not mess around. If you're not sprinting forward as soon as the opening cutscene ends, you will immediately die. And that's pretty emblematic of this fight as a whole. Most of Big Red's attacks will one-hit kill you, and you could only carry 3 cool drinks at a time in this fight set in the volcano. This means that 3 of your slots, drinks plus combines for more, of your 20 item slots instead of the 24 you get later, are immediately devoted just to staying alive, above and beyond the potion space you need because of its huge travel damage. There's no guts or whim skill either, you only need to get hit 3 times and the whole quest is over. You either knew how to fight a Fatalis and you could maintain concentration for the required time, or you just failed. And now, any mediocre player can kill the final boss. Dire Moralis is more akin to a Sidiojuice or Gen fight rather than a proper end boss battle, despite his physique. It's very slow and often just ignores the player. It's also very procedural in that you break one body part at a time and then you finish it off. There's little subtlety or mystery to it. The weak points glow bright red and might as well have a big sign saying "hit me here," and they're generally accessible. Fatalis' head? Not so easy to hit. You'll also receive an instant message on your system notifying you of all of Morales' attacks before they happen. I don't actually think that Black Fatalis is a particularly good fight. It's coded very badly, and that you can bait it into a wall and then wail on his leg tail hero for 45 minutes. Crimson and White, though, requires strategy.
Pause real quick. So there's some claims I'd like to address. He's referring to, when he talks about Black Fatalis, he's referring to the, again, PlayStation Portable version of Black Fatalis. I said before that Black Fatalis has undergone a lot of AI changes, and that even occurred in 1st and 2nd gen, and most players aren't aware of that. He is not bugged or coded as poorly in Monster Hunter 1. Granted, this is me talking to Adam Chaos Ludi with regards to this and seeing footage. I'm not to the end of Monster Hunter 1. But his AI did change between Monster Hunter 1 and Monster Hunter G, and between Monster Hunter G and Monster Hunter Freedom Unite, and then he would disappear till 4th gen after Freedom Unite. I think so with and Crimson and White would get tweaked a good number of times too. Actually, in every game that they were in.
I know you did mention that earlier, that they're basically like completely different fights from like each, like 2 generations basically.
Yeah, they aren't, I would describe them as not quite as flashy in terms of like, they're not going to do things that are, I mean, Crimson and White will do some pretty flashy stuff, but it's not like you don't have the same like crazy animations that you'll get in 4th gen with the Fatalis trio. They'll actually remind you quite a bit of Rathalos, which again plays into its theme of being bigger, stronger Rathalos. There's certain parts about the fight, because I'm a huge 2nd gen Fatalis fan, and again, I know a lot of people don't like it or like them. There are ways you can approach the fight, and there's some really interesting stuff about the fight that only those fights have in only those generations. Number one, he is right. The best hit zone for Fatalis is the head, and it's very hard to access. Comparing it to Dire Morales so the credit I'll give Dire Morales is he did update the Fatalis skeleton, because obviously Fatalis didn't debut at all any version in 3rd gen. And so a lot of the attacks that you'll see in Monster Hunter 4, Monster Hunter 4 Ultimate, a lot of those are actually remarkably similar to Dire Morales' attacks. It's not to say that Dire Morales is like completely started everything over. There are still some attacks that are carried over from 1st and 2nd gen. But it wouldn't, like, Zoshia uses a lot of attacks that Dire Morales does. Very similar animation. So that's really cool. And I wouldn't necessarily call Zoshia easy, but Dire is quite slow. It does have like really, really obvious hit points or like weak spots. I would probably, in terms of like end game monsters, I would relate Dire Morales to. It reminds me more of like Xeno'jiva, where I think thematically it's cool. I think it's neat that we get it was a monster like Zoshia that was similar to Fatalis, but not Fatalis, which I think is inherently cool. It uses underwater in a neat way. Like in order to hit those spots, you need to know how to elevate yourself underwater. But I wouldn't call it like it's not as demanding as the Fatalises are in first and second gen. The Fatalises also had really cool unlock requirements in first and second gen. I don't want to get too deep into that because I'd rather let you discover those things. They're just a different design. Like they're part of second gens and first gens design that it didn't quite carry over as much. So there's not like a third gen equivalent to it. Yeah, Crimson Fatalis and White Fatalis have so you have enraging monsters, right?
Yeah.
Where they get faster and their stats modify, and sometimes they'll throw out a new attack that you haven't seen before. That's more common later on in the series. Crimson and White introduced a different type of state called armor mode.
Where you get the bouncy White Fatalis.
Yeah, and it requires you to change your playstyle, because for the most part, you will approach almost every fight the same way. You try to exploit the best hit zone you can using the tools that you have. Well, all of a sudden, all the hit zones are the same, and your attacks are going to be deflected. And there's a few different strategies you can go about dealing with it. But again, one of the things that makes the fight unique in second gen, in my opinion, one of the reasons my favorite is Gunlance is uniquely positioned as a melee weapon to deal with both states. It has a high enough upswing to hit the head, and you can hit the head during certain animations. It's really fun to do. Rather tricky. Great sword, long sword, and maybe Hunting Horn. I haven't tried it with Hunting Horn's backswing, but there's a few other weapons that can also do it if it's not performing an animation where its head's close to the ground. Because even Sword and Shield can hit the head during some attacks and during some animations. But like finding those openings, and again, these are usually during attacks and those sorts of things, that's a really fun, like optimizing that's a lot of fun to me. But then that whole narrative switch flips on its head, and when they're in armor mode, they also transition usually into enrage mode, so things become like you're dealing with the maximum amount of damage output that monster's dealing with, and speed and defense. So you can either dedicate part of your inventory and part of your build to true damage, we call it, so bombs, cluster shots. Other players might dedicate, in multiplayer, they'll dedicate part of their inventory to status, because now all of a sudden paralysis, and I've seen some people run sleep, though it's not as popular, becomes fairly valuable. Or element, right? So like when raw hit zones are all the same and element hit zones are all the same, provided you have a weapon that doesn't bounce, or like have you're building into a skill that lets you not bounce. You can do some pretty decent damage. Like it's slow, but you can do some pretty decent damage. And it just becomes a game of finding safe spots to attack rather than finding the best hit zone to exploit. And you'll think about so there are like different openings in the fight too, where it'll fly up and land. And most of the time when it's doing those sorts of things, like a lot of players will be like, wow, it's wasting my time. No, it's giving you an opportunity to put down bombs or to like get ready to hit certain parts, at least in my opinion. And there's all these different dynamics that go into it. But they have a lot of stats. Like they have a lot of HP. They will one-shot you if you're not fully, you don't have gear that's fully maxed out or tailored to being defensive against them. And there's certain ways they'll like track you in certain ways. They're the most, maybe with the exception of Kashala, they're some of the most intricate flyers in terms of when they're flying, their AI does some unique stuff where it can, if you don't know what you're doing, you can get punished for it pretty hard. So yeah, there's some of my favorite final bosses. So I can understand why he's got gripes with Dire, but I don't know that I would call Dire necessarily a bad final boss, just a different final boss than the Fatalis, because the Fatalis is really just like push everything to the absolute limit. And I mean, he does it in World 2.
Yeah. Would you say for narrative final bosses in the series, like after first and second gen Fatalises, it kind of moves into a
Alla, I think is original, like Monsterhunter tries Latreon. I think he's a fairly decent challenge too, and I think he also pushes things, but in a different way. So they introduced blights, elemental blights in third gen, and so to have this monster that has every single blight but water blight, I guess, until World. He has some intricacies to him too that are very reminiscent of that. But yeah, I don't think narrative final bosses are bad.
But there's been like a clear shift from like the Black Dragons to the new narrative final bosses that they're not like easy, but they're not like world-ending challenge tough.
I just don't think they're the biggest test of skill in their games. Like if we were to compare Dire Morales to Abyssal Lagiacrus or Stygian Zinogre in 3U, I think those other fights are more difficult than Dire is. But I also don't think that they cap off, like, I mean, Abyssal challenges you underwater pretty hard, but like, I don't think they cap off the sort of themes of 3U as well as Dire does. I don't think that's a bad thing. I just think it's just different.
Yeah. I mean, I definitely don't mind them not being like super crazy.
It's like how I don't necessarily like I could see value in making them harder. It would be cool. I also haven't fought Dire's event version, so there's two different versions of some of the final bosses, including in first and second gen, or I should say in second gen. There were different versions of Fatalis, mostly because Elder Dragons functioned differently in the PSP game. Well, actually, and the PS2 games. They function differently in second gen.
Yeah.
But there's an event version of Dire Morales that I don't know exactly how hard he hits. So it's like Zoshia. Like Zoshia I was excited for before we got its full version. And I don't know that I thought Zoshia was a bad, like, end to low rank.
Yeah, it was definitely a fine end to low rank. It just wasn't, it was just like Zeno or Shara or Ataka that I experienced, or Narwa, like, or Geisma Gorm. Like, and none of them are like you phrased it, the pinnacle challenge in any way for these games.
Yeah, I think Geisma Gorm's actually probably more of an apt example because it's the end of G rank, very similar to Dire.
Shara Shvalda as well wasn't too difficult, and like that's. And Ataka's really cool. I wish there was a harder fight version of Ataka. I think that's one of GU's biggest missteps.
I mean, I was just about to say, wanting more from them doesn't mean I'm necessarily dissatisfied, but like, I don't think, so Maze is trying to bring up it's emblematic of the rest of the game.
Yeah. No,
I don't know to
Maze's credit though, at this time period, it would probably make more sense for the argument that he's making, since it's only been those 3 gens at this point.
Yeah, and he's trying to predict how things will go in 4th gen. And yeah, like if that was, it's like going into that and being like, wow, this is the only G rank game in the 3rd generation, and this is the G rank final boss. Yeah, I get why he's frustrated with it, because he's assuming that every final boss is going to be that more of a story, narrative style, cinematic, I guess, final boss. And it's clearly not the trend, like the way the series was trending, because I can't remember the last quest of 4U, because it depends on if you consider the episodic quests. But like, I don't know that I'd consider Gogmazios particularly easy in the same way. Yeah, it's an interesting talking point. It is reflective of the time that this was up.
That makes sense. Okay. Well, that was a lot of other final bosses and stuff. Here let's continue.
An understanding of how their armor modes work, as well as where and when to hit them. Morales isn't a terrible boss by any measure, but it is much more simple. Wearing the full set from the final boss should be a badge of skill and tenacity. Back in the day, someone wearing full dragon armor could strut about, and people knew just how much effort it took and how many Rathlos plates it took to wear that. Even in Freedom Unite with cluster spam, most players couldn't actually stay alive long enough to beat the HR9 Weight Fatalis, and outside of game savers, in all of my time playing Freedom Unite online, I saw only 2 players with the full Weight Fatalis Z set out of the hundreds and hundreds of people I played with on G-Rank quests.
Now, one of the comments I saw actually poked fun at this statement because they were like, the White Fatalis armor wasn't as good as like other armors.
Well, I mean, so to give him some credit, there's like I want to say there's like a top 4 sets in Monsterhunter Freedom Unite's armor set diversity at the end, like in terms of like what's most optimized, isn't particularly great. It's actually pretty akin to World in that way, where like there's a few sets that just dominate. You have Rajang with, they call it Art of Unsheathing, but it's critical draw and focus. And critical draw is ridiculously balanced. It gives you 100% affinity, even with a negative affinity weapon. It sets your affinity to 100%, which is insane. White Fatalis gave attack up large and sharpness +1. The comment I believe you're referring to is one that was saying that the Crimson set was a replacement. I mean, yes and no. Numerically, it's not. But at the time, I'm sure players weren't trying to do absolutely everything to get the most amount of damage possible. And the reason numerically it's not, like, it's definitely one of the better sets because it has adrenaline and it has guts. And for those that don't know, adrenaline is the armor skill heroics, and guts lets you survive a hit that would take you normally and kill you. Guts effectively is not giving you much value there because it's pretty easy to get into adrenaline range, and then you gain a massive amount of defense when you're below half in adrenaline range. So there's very few things that would, and it's on a set with a massive amount of defense. There's very few attacks that will one-shot you. Granted, if you're fighting something like Fatalis and it does one of its dragon attacks, which you're weak to, yeah, it's probably going to put you at guts level, depending on if you're at fully max health or not. I don't necessarily think it's just a difference in where they were putting emphasis at the time, in my opinion, on armor. So like the amount of grind that you had to do for the end game sets, yeah, it was a lot even on the PSP titles. It's less than the PS2 titles, but even on the PSP titles. But I think there was less grind in general across the board in 3rd gen, but you had charms, you know, like that if you wanted grind and you didn't, you weren't opposed to the charm system or the talismans, then it makes sense not to have as grindy of a set. I don't know. I think a better example of like whether or not players were killing the final boss more would be who is running around with like its weapons, because that would tell you who beat it. Yeah, in both games they were fairly strong. Yeah, there certainly were alternatives to White Fatalis in Freedom Unite, but in Freedom Unite, if you were like trying to get at the maximum amount of damage possible, there's very little that outdoes White Fatalis' set, which is just not as true of the games that came before it. I think it's one of the things that I can say Freedom Unite does worse than like Freedom 2, Monsterhunter 2. I don't know about G. Yeah, its build diversity wasn't particularly amazing because those sets were so dominant. Because the reason adrenaline isn't in the conversation, you'd think like it'd be a 30% damage boost. It's either somewhere between like 30 and 50 for being under 40% HP. Well, you have Feline Heroics, which is a food skill, which results, I believe, in like, yeah, probably like a 30 to 50% damage buff. I don't know the exact number from being at that HP. And as I said before, the only game where both adrenaline and heroic stacked was Freedom 2. Granted, you have to be very skilled to play at 10 HP versus 40% HP. But yeah, numerically, it is still probably the best thing you could have paired with that. If you were, again, trying to get the maximum amount of damage possible and you're trying to get the lowest time possible, that'd be the way to do it.
Okay. That's a interesting little batch of fun facts. All right, because I was just like, was it really like that? You know, people not running around.
I mean,
with
it was it was a huge grind, but like saying that's due to White Fatalis being challenging. I mean, it is very challenging, but I don't know if the reason you saw more Daimaral sets were because the overall grind was shorter. I don't remember Dyer's crafting requirements, but overall 3rd gen had like lower crafting requirements. I'm not entirely certain. I don't think that holds up particularly well as like a definitive, hey, this game's easier because more people are beating the final boss, which I could believe that more people were beating Dire Morales than White Fatalis, but like I don't know that I would use that as as a supporting argument.
Yeah, different design philosophies and choices and such. At least with hindsight, we know, you know.
Yeah, of course. And again, there weren't that many video essays that I could frame this around. I'm sure I'd make at the time. I'm probably sure I'd make similar, if not worse, mistakes.
Yeah, definitely a product of time. Okay, let's continue forward with the maze portion.
All the bosses could be cheesed to death, whether it's sleep bombing, clustering, fire S soft locking, or slime spamming. But here, it's easier to cheese, and if you do screw up your fondue party, it's almost never fatal. Capcom is not good at balance in Monster Hunter. Between the skills on armor sets, the damage output of certain weapons or classes, or the interaction between armor skills not being thought out, you can always exploit something. But what's really egregious about 3U is the slime element. It's not controversial to say that slime is overpowered. When you can break a G-rank Black Diabolos's horns in 3 hits at the start of a fight, you know it's pretty bad. But what makes...
So I have heard like the stories about slime being super overpowered. And then I've heard murmurings of like a hammer called Grongingus or something like that. I'm still not sure what that is.
So slime is blast, for those of you that don't know. Yeah, it's one of the things I will agree on. It's almost in the same caliber of strength as mount spamming with maximum buffs on Insect Glaive in 4th gen, where it's like, okay, it's really hard to find an alternative to the amount of damage output for the amount of, like, it would take a lot more work with different strategies. Because it was a new status condition, so the way statuses work is, for melee weapons anyway, the every hit that you do has a chance to proc the status. And once that status procs, it'll apply a certain amount of that status till it reaches a threshold, and once it crosses that threshold, you'll get the benefit of that status. And Blast's benefit is that it does damage, additional damage. It's a mix of monsters having a relatively low threshold to cross, initial threshold, and then build up on thresholds for Blast, and also just the damage that Blast did when it procced was a lot. Like a lot. I don't know. It's just very hard to find. Like, they've done a much better job of tuning new mechanics like that. But this was their first outing on something as unconventional as Blast. Because, like, they introduced Ice in 2nd gen. And Ice Element, I mean, there was a decent chunk of things that were weak to Ice Element, but it didn't function uniquely in the same way. They definitely nerfed Blast they nerfed Slime, which became Blast in 4th gen by a good chunk. And then there's some monsters that are still weak to it, and that you can use that. You can use Slime to have an advantage in those fights, but most of the time monsters are relatively resistant to it. It's definitely one of the bigger, he calls them balancing failures, but yeah, it's one of the bigger oversights for sure.
Would you say there's ever been anything in series comparable to 3rd gen Slime?
I'm trying to think.
I mean, I've heard like mount spamming thresholds.
It's Yeah, so you have mount spamming, like there's just not as much of a threshold to get off of mounts, and then obviously you get free damage for the monster being on the ground. And then you had the buffs that you got, like when you have all 3 buffs on the Encyclave, the benefit that you got was insane in both Monster Hunter 4 and Monster Hunter 4U. And there are also some fights, like, so we were talking about Fatalis' head being really high. There are some fights that uniquely get punished that weren't punishable previously, that suddenly that entire fight shifts because mounting exists. And people are really easily able to exploit things. Like, that's close. I would call Slime almost felt like it's somewhere between that and the Clutch Claw wallbang. Like the Clutch Claw, the Clutch Claw shortcut wallbang into Instant Enrage. Like, it's not as necessary as that. Like, that dominated the game definitively. But it's in kind of in that ballpark. Like, I don't want to say it's impossible to play 3U without Slime, but like, it's very clearly they're very clearly, you're going to be fighting the flagship. It's a required quest, being Brachydios. You're very clearly encouraged to use Slime in 3rd gen. And it's very similar to being very encouraged to use mounts in 4th gen, and very similar to being incentivized to use the Clutch Claw to help you do more damage in 5th gen. It's in that tier, which we really didn't have. Like, I mean, not most of the mechanics stayed relatively, combat-wise, stayed relatively similar in 1st and 2nd gen. Even, like, I know I was just talking about, like, crit draw greatsword being crazy in Freedom Unite, and what I would consider, like, over-centralizing. But even though it was over-centralizing, it wasn't. There were also other over-centralizing things, so it wasn't necessarily dominant in the same way. You also had, like, auto-reload, heavy bowgun with element. You had hammer being hammer. Hammer's motion values in 2nd gen are insane. I think that is partially a consequence of hammer being the worst weapon in Monster Hunter 1. And they would tune down hammer in the same way they would tune down blast. But, like, yeah, it's rough because it definitely, it's just so hard for me to make an argument for something being stronger than blast in overall in 3U in terms of, like, options. I mean, there's niche case scenarios where, like, exploiting an element will get you close, but yeah, you used to see it everywhere all the time on 3U. It's hard to avoid.
Okay, one more question. So the Grongingus, I don't even know if I'm saying that right. That's a hammer, to my knowledge. Whose hammer is that? Is that Brachy's?
No, I don't. Hold on, let me pull this up here real quick, actually.
Because I've heard about Slime, and then I've heard about Grongingus. Like,
it was. So there were a few weapons. It's Uragon's hammer. There were a few weapons like Grongingus, and the popcorn gun lance, which actually debuted in Freedom Unite, was brought back for 3U. And there's some weapons that have hidden. They don't have Awaken in 5th gen, but there was a mechanic that was introduced in Monster Hunter Tri called Awakening, where a weapon that traditionally only does raw can be awakened to do a hidden element or status. And Grongingus had blast and a ton of raw. So I'm pretty certain it also had, like, purple sharpness. So it's, if you got sharpness +1. Yeah, it's insane. There are a few awakened a few awakened weapons that don't natively have blast on them that would gain blast, that would be more powerful than the Brachydios weapons. So Brachydios isn't the only monster that would have this. And he's going to bring one of them up a little bit later in the video. So he's going to bring probably the biggest. The hammer might be cracked, but there's one more he'll bring up that's utterly insane, in my opinion.
Oh, wow. Okay. All right. Maybe we'll run into that soon. At least I hope so.
Makes slime different
It
from
should be
past
coming up.
balancing issues is the power to ease of use ratio and its use against absolutely everything. To explain how bad it is, you needed to understand the history of balance failures across the games. The first big exploit arising from an oversight is headlocking. In the first game, Monster Hunter 1, if you did enough damage to a body part, you would see a stagger animation. If you breached the stagger limit on a part while it was still in the stagger animation, which was pretty easy since most animations gave a free damage window, it would re-stagger, even if the animation hadn't finished.
We talked about this earlier. That's not how that works. And again, the misconception is because there's latency there. So when the stagger ends, that's when you do the next hit that would bring you over the flinch threshold, because if you did it too early, that flinch that you should have gotten would have gotten eaten. It functions the same way that it does in basically every game. But when you're looking at that with lag, what'll happen is it'll look like the monster hasn't finished its flinch, and then it gets flinched again, but that's because you're receiving a delay. There's just a delay there when you're not hosting the area.
Gotcha. That's understandable.
Again, just for clarification, for those of you, if this, again, ends up in a separate video or what have you.
The fact checking, yeah.
Yeah, and don't believe everything, like, very experienced player talking about things. Don't believe everything that you hear. They can make mistakes too, and make assumptions too. It happens to all of us.
All right. Good PSA.
Allowed you to keep a creature in a permanent cycle of staggers and kill some creatures very quickly. It didn't work on everything and it required very specific weapons, but online did degenerate into farming Rathlos plates while one guy kept it headlocked. Monster Hunter Freedom is a PSP port of Monster Hunter G, which is an expansion of Monster Hunter 1 for the PS2. Somehow, the PSP iteration picked up a change to the damage formula that for no discernible reason gave every sword and shield in the game a free 50% damage increase.
Now, is that true?
So, Sword and Shield has a weapon modifier to give it a higher level of sharpness. There's actually, it's not the only weapon that has weapon modifiers. So Lance used to do, on its attacks, used to prioritize the better of two hit zones between the impact hit zone and the cutting hit zone. And those modifiers get changed over time. But the way a sharpness modifier works is you are less, it's actually better than a damage buff. It's not just a 50% damage increase, it's a 50% sharpness modifier, which gives you the 50% damage, but also means you bounce on some zones that, or you're not going to bounce on some zones that other weapons would bounce on, because it's factoring that when calculating whether or not you should bounce. If you're wondering, how do you know if you're going to bounce? It's the hit zone you're attacking versus your sharpness level and your sharpness modifier. It's why in second gen, or I should say in Freedom 2 and Freedom Unite, actually it might be for just Freedom Unite, I'm not entirely certain which one, they would introduce a sharpness modifier for spirit gauge, where if you're in spirit gauge or in spirit mode, but when you build up the bar enough, you suddenly won't bounce on some hit zones. That's a result of you not only getting a damage increase, but also getting a modifier applied, a sharpness modifier applied. So Sword and Shield in Freedom 1 is very strong. Very, very strong. It's one of the things that I can say is unique about, so that they talk about Freedom 1 being a port of Monster Hunter G. That's not entirely true. There's stuff that you miss out in Monster Hunter G, and there's stuff that's unique about both games. It is unique about Monster Hunter Freedom that Sword and Shield is that crazy. So if you're a huge Sword and Shield fan, in particular a huge Sword and Shield fan, and you like first generation combat, Freedom's a game you should definitely check out, because it's nuts. I would say it's even stronger than it is in like 4th gen, because Sword and Shield is with oils, with the back hop. Sword and Shield players were eating good.
Damn. Okay. I'll have to remember that if I ever end up playing Freedom 1. Okay.
Someday far down the line.
Someday way down the line.
That's a pretty big free increase, and Sword and Shield is very powerful in Monster Hunter Freedom. That said, hammers would still outdamage them even though in first generation you couldn't actually knock creatures out. Sword and Shield was unbalanced, but still outdamaged by other classes a lot of the time. Aside from this, Monster Hunter Freedom wasn't bad from a balance perspective, although dual swords and greatswords were pretty tepid. In Monster Hunter Freedom 2, that 50% damage boost on Sword and Shields dropped to about 12%. Sword and Shield was actually pretty usable without being silly. Hammers now knocked creatures out and definitely ruled the roost generally. Gun lancers were ultimate turtle mode by being able to dish out good damage while blocking, and of course anything Dragon Weak was fodder.
Remember, when he's talking about second gen, he's talking about Freedom 2. So don't take any of this as being indicative of DOS. Now, granted, yes, it's still true that hammers have a crazy... So in Freedom 2 and DOS, with KO being introduced, KO, the dizzy stun that you'd apply with impact, didn't interrupt paralysis. Meaning in multiplayer, one of the strategies that I've used before too, you can have somebody with an impact weapon knock out a monster, or a person with paralysis paralyze a monster, and that would lead into, you can do these weird sorts of chains of paralyzing and then KOing and paralyzing and then KOing, because as one ended, the other one would begin, and while both of them are going on, you'll be building up for the other one. It just something that they would change in Freedom Unite. But yeah, I wouldn't necessarily take whatever he's talking about as describing how the meta was thought of in DOS, because it's going to be different than Freedom 2, despite them sharing that common similarity.
Okay. That is like a funny distinction, like having to remember like the differences between Freedom and Freedom 2 and Freedom Unite and DOS.
Yeah. So he's talking about Western releases. So again, I know that more people have played Monster G and more people have played Monster DOS in the Western audience, but like the only games out at this time: Monster 1, Monster Freedom 1, Monster Freedom 2, Freedom Unite, and then the third gen games, except for Portable Third. So it'd be Monster Try and Monster 3U. I guess a total of, I have to do math again. So that'd be a total of 6 games versus, it would be 9. Yeah. That you would have had in Japan. Now, granted, he's played Portable Third. So he's played one of the Japanese games, just not the console, not G or DOS. So most players, like most Western players, wouldn't even have the context that Portable Third would be providing for him. But, very different time being a Western fan than being a Japanese player.
Yeah. Okay.
For the Akanto bow, which basically had G-rank stats in a game with high-rank creatures. But for the most part, things were pretty good, especially considering the 4 new weapon classes being Gunlance, Bow, Hunting Horn, and Longsword that were added into the game. There was of course the fact that Adrenaline Plus 2 and Feline Heroics stacked, and Heroics was still a 1.5 times mod, but few players were good enough to really exploit this outside of the already comically powerful Akanto bow. Freedom Unite dropped Gunlance's guard poke down a peg and made the class a bit mediocre, and did the same with bows, and took away Sword and Shield's free 12% damage boost, and changed the recoil mechanics on normal and elemental bowgun shots. It also changed how auto reload worked, and heavy bowguns went from crap to extremely powerful when used in a certain way. While they could pump out elemental damage like nobody's business, there were only a handful of creatures weak enough to elements that HPG won speed competitions. Greatsword picked up Art of Unsheathing and became great. Longsword was a sleeper hit for much of the game's life, and of course the mighty Hammer continued to rule the roost against almost everything. Monster Hunter Try dropped the classes that Monster Hunter DOS introduced to start a bit fresher in a new engine on a new console. They thought it'd be a good idea to include a mechanic that encouraged longsword users who are already known for their tact and ability to work well in a team online to spam wide slashes, but worse was the new lance counter mechanic. Countering is a good idea, but it allowed a user to deflect any incoming attack and essentially attack and block at the same time. And this allowed an infinite lance combo that was very safe to use. It was working as intended, but it just allowed a fair amount of very safe damage to be put out onto any given creature.
Okay, we can pause. So, third gen would be the introduction of counters. Counters didn't exist before third gen. And in Lance's defense, to get its counter to be effective, depending on your matchup, you may need guard because the attack that you followed up with, or being able to follow up with an attack at all, would depend on the hit that's incoming. So it's definitely one of the more balanced counters, but again, it's like the first time we're seeing a weapon with a counter period. The other thing that I was going to mention, I'm sure he's not going to, how to describe this? He's not going to go into like too much depth on it in general. When we're talking about like weapons winning speed competitions in second gen, the meta back then versus like what's winning speed competitions now, or like speed runs now for Premium Night has changed, and that just happens when players play the game for long enough. So the tier list doesn't necessarily look the same as what he's describing. It's not to say that he's entirely off, but like it's not necessarily like it's not 1-to-1 how he's described it, but it's not the end of the world. Like he's close. So
okay, yeah, I find it's another one of those things like new gen. Lance has always been the counter weapon, to me. And then even like GU and stuff.
Well, so like spirit levels, when he was talking about longsword spamming wide slashes, that was the first time you got the roundhouse slash to level up your spirit gauge.
So you didn't have spirit combo in
You had spirit combo, you just didn't have the roundhouse slash or spirit levels. So you'd fill up the gauge and you get a benefit for having the gauge full, and that benefit would disappear after a certain amount of time unless you maintained your gauge at full. So there's this sort of dynamic with longsword where you'd have to choose whether or not the extra damage that you get from the spirit slashes was worth the damage over the damage buff. Most of the time you're going to be using it, especially when you're leveraging element, because the spirit attacks are faster, but you didn't have to micromanage this additional, like, because the levels are like effectively a gauge on top of the gauge. You're not micromanaging that in the same way. Same thing. There's also like a little bit more mobility leverage to longsword in that you have the back sweep, but you don't have the sweep side to side. There were a number of like moveset changes that would happen in third gen for most of the weapons.
Wait, back sweep and stuff? Are you talking about like fade slash and stuff?
Yeah, so yeah, when you fade slash, you would only fade slash backwards. You couldn't do.
You didn't have the sideways?
Nope. So like in terms of, so this is when he was talking about positioning, you had pretty limited options when choosing where you were going to be, and those limited options got expanded like quite a bit throughout the series life cycle. So like, let's say I have a monster charging me, it doesn't really matter what monster it is. There's a very big difference if like I've just attacked in first and second gen and I've just attacked in any other game afterwards. My array of what I can do, a lot different. Like it's kind of like the same thing with being able to roll backwards or step forwards with lance and gun lance, or like with the other weapons. There was limited angles you could take, so you had to be very conscientious of like, okay, I'm gonna attack facing this direction and commit to this direction, knowing that I can only respond in these ways. That is just another factor that you don't really, I mean, now you have multiple ways to get out of different things, and you can cancel into different things, and that's not to say that there wasn't some unique tech going on in first and second gen, but it was certainly a very big shift in player mobility.
The simpler times.
Yep.
The Stone Age, if you will.
Yeah. where people were just like bonk, and that's my
Bonk roll, but you can't roll backwards.
Yeah, rolling backwards would be insane. How are you supposed to fit your weapon underneath you? That makes no sense.
Oh man. Okay.
Portable Third rehumbled the heavy bowgun, making light bowguns rapid fire suddenly good by comparison. It raised the shot damage weak points on a number of creatures, and rapid bows became top tier. A longsword picked up some stupid boosts in that the red bar and a full spirit gauge gave you more of a boost than feline heroics when they were combined. But overall, things were pretty balanced across the weapon classes, with the counter on lances coming down a peg. There was one big failing which is unusual across the games. Not an issue of balance or power, but an actual glitch: auto guard on gun lancers. When using auto guard, any of the shelling or reloading animations would be cancelled into a block for you by the game.
Wait, for real?
Yes.
That's
Yes.
crazy.
Let me do some. So again, Gunlance, the most bugged weapon in the series. I'm pretty certain. So yeah, any like if you fired a shell or if you quick reloaded a shell, quick reloading was added. So the things that were added to Gunlance in 3rd gen were charging shots, like doing the charged expanded shots, quick reloads, the slam. So you had different pokes, but you didn't have the overhead slam into full burst. And all the charge shells you probably still had to commit to the charging. I'm not entirely certain though. But yeah, regular shells and the quick reload, you certainly did cancel into auto guard. From what I understand, Adam has told me that it's only the auto guard talisman that you get at the start of the game that has this bug. I haven't done testing on myself, so I'm not entirely certain. But if that's the case, you get an auto guard talisman at the start of the game. So like, yeah, it's crazy.
I've got to play through you now.
Well, it's Portable Third that has this bug.
Oh,
3 would
okay. I've got to play Portable Third.
It's one of the arguments that people make for arguing that Portable Third is the easiest game in the series. I don't know that I would fully attribute like its difficulty being relatively low simply due to that bug, but that bug does, yeah, you can do some crazy stuff with it. It's a weird title, and it's a weird weapon. Yeah, you would think that the devs would have figured out everything about Gunlance several games in, but of course not. They would just find a different way to make it bugged.
The mysterious gun lance, fun lance.
Yep.
That's so funny. Okay.
Yeah,
Wow.
It's a very quirky bug, but yeah, and he's gonna mention in a second. Shelling does true damage, so ignores hit zones. He's gonna describe things a little bit differently than that, but using modern terminology, we'll be talking about why that's kind of overtuned.
Okay.
This allowed you to literally shell a creature, and shelling was buffed, and block at the same time. Since shelling was a form of raw damage and ignored armor, it was effective against everything. With your infinite shells, you could sit in a corner and with your back to a wall, and with the Mega Juice active, and spam O over and over to clear quests pretty quickly.
Now, he mentions this specifically. Did Gunlance not ignore hit zones on shells in 2nd gen?
No, it did. I mean, to be fair, Gunlance has always had a fire component, so it'll do a little bit of extra damage, depending on the hit zone in all games. But yeah, it always ignored hit zones. The difference is, actually, in every single one of the games up to Portable Third, the damage that shelling did was modified. It does relatively small damage in dose, but so we're talk a little bit about Gunlance's balancing. Yeah, it did relatively low damage in dose. It's not the worst. You can make use of it, and there are use cases for shelling. A lot of people say it's worthless. I disagree with them, and I play way too much Gunlance, so I think I know what I'm talking about. In Freedom 2 is probably the game I would describe Gunlance as being the most powerful it's been probably till Wilds. And he mentioned that the guard poke was good. It wasn't just that the guard poke was good. Shelling was okay. Like, it wasn't amazing, but it was okay. Gunlance also had, like, pretty good weapon trees. Not to say that they were, like, cracked in the same way as the Cantor bow was in Freedom 2. It was pretty solid all around. It would get a rework in Freedom Unite. I wouldn't necessarily call it a nerf relative to its power, but they put more of an emphasis on the lower poking combo, the combos that were a little bit riskier. They sped up some things. But yeah, Shelling got its higher levels, and it also it reworked the artillery skill. So it would reduce your Wyvern's Fire cooldown, and your Wyvern's Fire cooldown in Dose is incredibly short. In Freedom 2, it's actually it's pretty long. But in Freedom Unite, you could lower it again if you wanted to spec into it. And Portable Third has all that stuff. Gave it a damage increase and also gave it auto reload if you wanted to exploit auto reload. So it was pretty good in Portable Third too, but I mean, it'll be, as he mentions, it'll be out damaged by other classes because Shelling doesn't scale with Raw in the same way. Wilds is the only game so far where Shelling scales with Raw, like a stat on the weapon. It's been a weird weapon for them to try to find a good balancing point, but I'm glad that it's like Freedom 2. It can get like it can do things close to like the top options, maybe with the exception of the Cantor bow. But Wilds, it's also up there in terms of its relative power level, which is, it's good. Like, it's nice to have a mix of the tier list because it was fairly middle to bottom tier most of the games. Not to say that I wouldn't play it, because I'll play it in every game, but yeah.
Okay.
3 Ultimate fixed the auto guy glitch, toned bows down a little bit, and while hammers and longsword are still top tier, mostly the classes are pretty consistent. The big offender here is the new element, slime. As is usually the case with Capcom, bringing something new in means it's too powerful. In addition to your normal damage, which as discussed above is massively pumped up from earlier games, you're getting highly damaging explosions on a regular basis. And since most people are using Slime Element online, those explosions are coming really fast. There's also a bow which can have Slime Element awakened on it, which puts out excruciating levels of slime damage, which people naturally flock to.
Yeah, and that would be the
Kelby bow?
Would be the Kelby bow. Yeah.
Okay.
So it was one of the weapons that had Awaken on it, and yeah, it would proc slime, but it also had some pretty good shot types. So again, the way status works on bow, when it's got the coating, it'll apply all the time. I'm pretty certain it procs if it's not got a coating on it. It'll proc as a chance for when it hits. But regardless, yeah, it put out a ton of slime status. And in multiplayer in particular, status does substantially more work because your build-up gets multiplied by the other players who are also doing build-up. So you're going to be seeing status procs a whole lot more. And there's only, like, you'll hit a cap where the monster can be oh so resistant to a status after proccing it a certain amount of times. It didn't really matter for slime because if you had enough players or if you were spamming out enough attacks, you'd still be getting the fairly powerful explosions rather quickly. The thing about slime explosions is, again, because your hits have a chance to proc it on melee weapons, it's not particularly easy to use them to like hard lock a creature in terms of like hitting a particular part and getting a proc, because if you accidentally hit another part in a procs, it's gonna take more hits to stagger it. But they did help contribute to stagger and 2 part breaks. So yeah, slime was kind of insane. I think the Kelby bow, how to describe it? It might be more powerful than the Acantor bow, but the Acantor bow was more powerful relative to the other options from the other weapon classes. It's one of the strongest weapons probably in the entire series. that doesn't mean that like, I'm sure if you ran heroics, there's probably other ways you can output more raw damage than the Kelbibo could, but for like no investment, like if you weren't even specking into it, it's insane.
Goodness gracious. Okay. I know what I have to at least try whenever I play that.
Yeah. It's not terribly hard to craft, and it's a good time.
All these funny little quirks and stuff to the old gen titles. Like it's fun hearing about because it's like, oh, I want to try this bug that never got fixed and try this busted weapon.
Again, there's a very big difference between playing Monsterhunter Tri, where slime doesn't remotely exist, and having that option be available to you. Like, they might share most of their roster, but the games are going to play very differently. That's with slime being slime, but it applies to the other games too.
Yeah. Okay.
Slime is different to other balancing failures is that it's useful against everything in all situations. Hammers are amazing in Freedom Unite, but poor against some creatures like Gravios or Chameleos. Auto reload in Freedom Unite was usually great, but very inefficient against things like Laoshan. But Slime, it's not only good against everything, it's often the best choice. If Slime weapons had lower raw damage to compensate for sudden hit zone independent burst damage, it'd be fine. But when you can trip a G-rank Silver Rathlos in 3 hits, it's too powerful. The Brachydios slime weapons all have high raw, great sharpness and slime to boot, not to mention the awakened weapons like Grogingas with their slime element.
There it is.
The explosions do the same damage regardless of where they happen, so it's not even like elemental damage where you need to target a body part to make the most of it. Spam your Demon Dance combo anywhere on a creature and watch it flinch like a long-tailed cat in a room full of rocking chairs, and if you do actually hit the weak point, well, that's just a nice bonus. One other thing to bear in mind is that 3U HD, so 3U on the Wii U, you're playing a port of a 3DS game. You're playing online in a game designed for solo players to complete, unlike Monsterhunter Tri, which is a game designed for up to 4 players normally. Monster health does not scale online. And interestingly, with the new mechanics, speedruns are not a test of skill anymore so much as they are a test of coordination.
Wait, so 3U on the Wii U?
So Monster Hunter 3U, the 3DS version, did not have... It had local multiplayer. It did not have online networking and an online server the way 3U did. The 3U.
Wow. Okay. So it didn't have. It doesn't have the like hub, like village.
Well, it has the. No, it does. It still does. But so in the PSP titles used to have gathering halls, and I would describe 3U's hub as being closer to a gathering hall than an online town.
Okay. Well, I'm talking more like as far as difference in difficulty, like damage and health.
No. It's a step up for sure, but that's where 3U's weird. It's a weird game, so is 4U, but 3U's weird because it's like if you followed up Monster Hunter World with its expansion Sunbreak. It's a technically a portable game, but it's an expansion of a console game. And so it doesn't really follow the same trends that the Freedom portable titles were trending perfectly, nor does it follow all the trends that the console games were leaning towards, all like the bouncing decisions and that sort of thing. It's kind of a bizarre amalgamation of both. So yes, it had closer balancing to a game that was designed mostly for solo play, but it also, on the Wii U version, you can also go online to an online server and consistently have 4 players and 3 players, which the console titles were more suited for. Like they had, again, monsters typically had more health. They adjusted things to slow progression. So like hunter rank points in Gen 1 and Gen 2, the games with hunter rank points to determine whether or not your hunter rank goes up, those are the console games. It's designed to have you play in multiplayer for longer. Not to say that there aren't key quests, there are in Monster Hunter 1 and G, but you don't need hunter rank points to rank up through the gathering halls of Freedom 1, Freedom 2, Freedom Unite. You just do the key quests in the Urgent. I don't remember, it's probably 3U's might be the game where you unlock your hunter rank and start using points once you've cleared progression. I'm pretty certain it's the game that started that, because I don't think Keythird did. So yeah, it's just this weird hybrid of a game. Again, which is why when Rise came out, and is very much following in the portable trend after World came out, and we've had these older players who started and have only played 3U, 4U, maybe GU, and World, and Rise comes out and it's got different balancing philosophy. Players are like, wait a minute, this isn't normal. But no, it follows legacy trends and is relatively similar to, like, again, the portable style.
Okay. Yeah, that's I'm not gonna lie, like that that kind of goes over my head a little bit, but maybe that'll be
it's something like, if you've experienced the game, it's something, or the games, it's something that you'd pick up on pretty quickly. But it's something that'd be easier to demonstrate in gameplay than it would be to try to describe it. It's an overall feel. Like, typically the PS2 games and Monster Hunter Tri on the Wii, again, they'd have housing, they have an online town, their small monsters were, again, more numerous, a little bit healthier, quests would give hunter rank points, like, there's all these things that those games have in common. And then portable games have things like a gathering hall instead, which doesn't have rotating events. You'd have download quests or download events instead, which Rise does too. It has usually an emphasis on the farm and the feline kitchen. It tends to be more geared towards being able to solo through it. They created the guild card. Like, the guild card didn't exist until Freedom, and it would stick around in Freedom 2 and Freedom Unite, but it wouldn't be present in Monster Hunter 2, because Monster Hunter 2 is a sequel to G, which is why when people go, like, these games are like, Freedom 1 is a port of G and Freedom 2 is a port of DOS, it's not exactly accurate. They're more two separate, and Portable Third would follow in this trend too, of being a portable game. Two separate, like, design similarities and series coinciding with each other. And again, 3U and 4U just kind of mesh some things together a little bit more. And it's not to say that World doesn't also mesh some things, or Rise doesn't also mesh some things, but there's more, like, there's more of a distinction between World and Wilds and Rise than there was between, like, 4 Ultimate and Generations Ultimate. It's not as clear to see. So I don't understand, like, I can understand why some people don't quite see it as distinctly.
Yeah. It's definitely one of those things that, like, you have to really go back and experience it to really comprehend it completely.
Yeah, or to see all the moving parts and how it slowly built up. Like, if you don't see the difference in the foundations, now that things are when things start to merge, it's not as apparent when the differences start to come out again.
True. Like, yeah. Okay. That'll be something I'll have to keep in mind as I go back and play the different titles. And
I think it'll be interesting if we have a conversation after you've played DOS and Freedom Unite, because it's pretty night and day, the difference between Monster Hunter 2 and either Monster Hunter Freedom 2 or Freedom Unite. Very, very different games.
Yeah, maybe I'll have, like, a retrospective recap with you and maybe a lot more of the old school crew. Just talk about my experiences.
I'm sure you'll hear similar talking points from the old school crew. I'm pretty certain I'm not alone.
Yeah.
So.
Oh, I think it would be amusing for you guys too to hear like my thoughts on the whole thing as like a new guy slowly going back.
I mean, it's always fun seeing people playing their first journeys, regardless of the Monster Hunter game. It's a good time.
Yeah, sweet. Okay.
When monsters don't get to move because they spawn into and die in a trap a few seconds later, who needs to be able to time attacks or dodge? The issues of balance in 3rd generation were different from other games, in that they allowed any player, no matter how mediocre, to complete quests. It doesn't matter how powerful Sword and Shield was in Monster Hunter Freedom, or how much damage you could put out with Speedfire and Freedom Unite, you still needed to know what you were doing to get the most out of those balancing failures.
I think that's a funny talking point because as easy as any new gen title has been, and as easy as like Maze is letting like 3rd gen sound, there's always been people that like you heard it more often from like 3rd and 4th gen and people that played 2nd gen, but most of the time I ever hear about people playing 2nd gen, a lot of times it was about Freedom Unite. But you still had,
and it's usually that tends to be the biggest percentage of people who've played 2nd gen. Yeah,
it's like I got walled by Great Jaggy, I got walled by Bulldrome, I got walled by like these baby monsters, and then like a lot of people quit and then came back and played a different Monster Hunter.
Yeah, it's funny. There's a good chunk of pre-world fans who started in like Try and barely got into it and left, and then came back later and played through the entire series. It's interesting hearing that, because again, like I was in the retroactively knowing this now, that I was in the fortunate enough position to have legacy players, people who were already invested in the series, bring me into the series, because I'm not sure if I would have bounced off of it or like what I would have thought of the games. It's funny because a lot of the games that I really like, I originally had negative impressions of. And Monster Hunter happens to be one of the series that, like, again, originally I just had this misconception of what it was and wasn't too into it, and then became like thoroughly addicted to it. So
yeah, it's just funny seeing the echoes of the past, like saying the same things, but it never really completely rings true.
Yeah, and it's again, he's coming at this from a player who knows, like, this is where it's difficult to discuss a game's overall difficulty, and difficulty is in general, like, it's a person who knew what they were doing in those games. And yeah, I mean, I'm sure new players in 3 Ultimate like did see the dramatic outlier that was Slime, and if they were playing multiplayer most of the time, and like would start exploiting it. But to say that the game is easier or is harder than Monster Hunter Freedom because of it, there's a consensus in the old school Discord that Freedom is the easiest Gen 1 game. Again, mostly because it's a portable title, but you might not know this, but Freedom starts you off in high rank.
Oh, for real?
Yeah, the star quests that you have access to from the beginning of the game, doing nothing, going into the Gathering Hall, is high rank. So the amount of content you would need to beat, granted it's difficult content, if you knew what you were doing in Freedom, the amount of content you would need to overcome is not nearly as much. This high rank, low rank, G rank sort of progression format really started to solidify around Freedom Unite. And yeah, in terms of like G rank starting after, like, I think Hunter rank, between like Hunter rank 6 and 7, or 6 going to 7 and 9 being the cap, and post 9 having endgame content. Like, a lot of this, there's a lot of quest structural things that Unite would establish that a lot of games would follow, or I should say a good chunk of the games afterwards followed. But their first portable venture, they didn't get everything about progression down. And yeah, Sword and Shield and Freedom, like, okay, yeah, small monster aggro's more oppressive in Freedom, but if you know what you're doing in Freedom, you can beat Freedom faster than you beat 3U because there's less content in it, like less progression to go through. The term content's not exactly the right term there. So yeah, I mean, there's different points in Freedom that like Dire Morales isn't going to be as difficult as Fatalis, but I also don't know that where I would rank Crimson Fatalis versus Abyssal Lagiacrus if you're not pulling off. There's like a cheese spot that you can do against Abyssal. I don't know how I would evaluate that. I don't know that Freedom's necessarily harder than pre-Burkidios 3U. Because unless you're getting carried by somebody who has weapons better than you, like higher tier weapons than you. Again, he's making an argument from this 3U effectively having online infrastructure and more players all the time, but like if you were to take both games solo, yeah, I don't know really what verdict I'd draw. Again, these games are on the easier side of things. I'd agree with him on that end. Like if we were to try to come up with a tier list, they would be in the bottom half for sure. Yeah, I'm not as sold on the it's definitively easier than Freedom. Freedom seems brutal for players who aren't familiar with Gen 1, but relative to players who are familiar with it, it's not that bad. Like it's for an experienced player, it's not all that hard to get through it. It's probably the shortest amount of time that Adam and Chaos have spent on doing their initial playthrough of it, because they've been going through. I've been playing with them, but they've been going through the portable titles because they've finished the console titles. Yeah, Freedom was beaten probably in like a week, not even, and that's with them somewhat taking their time. Granted, they play through games pretty quickly, so they're not the best metric for that. Yeah, I don't think it's a particularly great conclusion, even though I can sympathize with some of his arguments.
So it looks like what I'm gonna have to do is play DOS so I can get that old gen hardcore feeling, then go to Freedom Unite, then go to Freedom 1. Or maybe even Freedom 2, then Freedom 1, then Freedom Unite.
Yeah, how that honestly, however you wanted to play through them, that sounds. Freedom 2, I think you should play before Freedom Unite because you can always import your save data into Freedom Unite as an option if you want to retain your save data. And I also think you can't do it the other way around.
Yeah, I think it would definitely be interesting. My only issue is that I want to experience it the way that most people
like from the ground up. Yeah, I mean, either way really works. The thing that's nice about doing Freedom 2 after Unite is that the AI in Freedom 2 is more similar to the DOS AI. They changed up a lot of the monster AI in Freedom Unite.
Okay, so it will be kind of like a fresh experience in a way.
It would be, it would be a pretty big transition if you went from Freedom 2 to Freedom Unite, whereas it's more of like you'll see more of a gradual change between going from DOS to Freedom 2 to Freedom Unite. You'll understand the stages a little bit more.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, all right.
And having created a Freedom Unite speedrun category, in order to beat the village, if you planned a route, you could beat Freedom Unite in like an hour and a half, the village part of it.
Holy moly.
Or I should say the low rank village part of it.
Okay.
I don't know what the high rank runs would be. If you're abusing every speedrun strat, you could do it in like half an hour. But I'm not expecting you to play at that level right from the get-go.
Yeah, probably not that way. And I'm definitely going to be like taking my time gathering stuff too.
And again, the villages are going to be a different experience than the hub, and it's up to you whether or not you want to play the hub solo or in multiplayer. I personally like doing solo playthroughs of things just because they're fun challenges, but I can understand why people would be like, nah, I'm not about that.
Most definitely. All right.
It wasn't a win button, it was a free damage increase option. And even then, each balance issue is useful in a subset of the game's missions. Slime is unique in that it's useful against everything. There are some cases where element or attributes like poison will win out over time, but unlike every other weapon type or element, slime is always good. The obvious response to many of the points I've made about balance is that if you don't like slime element, or hammers, or auto reload, etc., then don't use them. It's a player versus enemy game, not a player versus player one. But in doing that, you reduce the amount of content in the game, and you're having to play artificially to get a challenge. That's not good game design. That doesn't offer you a sense of accomplishment. This is going to sound very elitist, as if the rest of this essay doesn't, right? But part of the attraction for me playing Monster Hunter was that not everyone could complete the games. It was, and remains, too difficult for the average gamer. If you don't think that's an attractive proposition in a game, consider the marketing for Dark Souls with its taunting of the target audience. Part of the
No, the elitist. Just kidding. I mean, that is an interesting viewpoint.
It's a sentiment that gets shared around even now with, again, in favor of difficulty. I'm not saying that difficulty isn't appealing for some players, but I also think it gets boiled down to very simply, this game is harder than this game most of the time. And not to say that people don't have supporting arguments, but there are different types of difficulty, and there are it's going to be different during different parts of the game. So, and it's going to appeal to every game's naturally going to appeal to differently to different people. So I don't think that even if you find conventionally difficult games to be more fun than easy games, I don't think you can always fully attribute it to this difficulty has gone up metric, or this difficulty has gone down metric. It could just be, hey, I don't like the way this game, or the easy it is to do certain things within a game, and honestly that's fair. Or I don't like the type of difficulty this game presents.
That, or they just don't like the style of the game as well. I remember there being a big stink when Monster Hunter World dropped, where people would be like, really, is this all you do? Is this all there is to the game? And people were like, well, what did you think? It's called Monster Hunter. But, it's a very different style of game. Most people are expecting a level to a boss, and then a level to a boss, and a better storyline.
And the hard part is the difficulty gets brought up sometimes as an excuse when somebody doesn't like other elements of the game.
Yeah, the get filtered mindset.
Yeah, when Rise comes out and has a different art style than World does, yeah, you might not stylistically like Rise, but don't blame that all on Rise being easier is the only reason that you're not picking up the game, or is the only reason it didn't appeal to everyone.
Yeah,
it's very rarely the case that one individual element is the reason that people aren't enjoying the game. It's the same thing with Wilds. Wilds, yeah, sure, the difficulty is a problem, but I mean, the game stability and performance is a massive problem. The scripted sort of story progression and the fact that you can't sequence break it is a problem. It's a really major problem for the speedrunning scene, because the amount of any percent runs that are still being done for World is a whole lot more than the any percent runs being done for Wilds, because of the way the game demands of the player, in terms of time waiting. There are I'm pretty certain some monsters have to transition to certain areas in a way that they haven't had to before in order to die.
Yeah.
And that kills speedrunning times. And that's those other elements have a bigger impact on audience retention and different post-launch excitement and just overall player engagement. It's kind of if a game has a really good modding scene or a really good side game mode, you'll see players stick around in that game a whole lot longer than otherwise. Yeah, there are some things that are unique to Wilds that is causing shifts, but it's also not to say that Wilds is the only game that's had issues with audience retention. I'm just a little disappointed that or at least it seems from the outside that wasn't a bigger concern when publishing Wilds for the company. Like Capcom really should have been like, yeah, we're gonna try to publish this game and make it capture as many players for as long as we generate as much hype as possible for when the expansion comes out, you know, like and ensure that the expansion pops off as much as possible too. And it doesn't seem like that was exactly where their mindset was at.
Yeah, I think they're definitely like banking on multiplying the sales later, and especially since like numbers wise, we won't know the complete like actual significance of retention until we see the overall like statistics across years. For
like when we have full hindsight of it, it's hard
because, you know, as we know with World, I know I brought this up earlier, but less than half of any console, like even PC, who knew what they were getting into and didn't like buy it day one, or they weren't able to buy it day one.
It's also hard to evaluate audiences in general because, yeah, sure, you have something like Steam charts, but there's so many other platforms.
Yeah, not the like PC, like console. It's funny that PC's getting fucked so hard because on the console side, even though it's not the best game performance wise, this is the best launch console title out of the last new gen outings. Like World didn't perform this good on launch hardware. It was struggling to hit 30 FPS and would even dip down.
No, it ran pretty awfully.
Yeah.
Even the demo that they had done for World, I have old footage of it on my computer. I'm like, wow.
Yeah. And like the Rise was impressive for being third party on the Switch, but it was the kinks in its armor were showing more when Sunbreak dropped, and you had the Citadel and you had Gore Magala and like all these other things, and that stable 30 was no longer a stable 30.
I mean, it also kind of got stretched if you had enough comrades like the dogs.
True, and all the weapon hit effects and everything.
Yeah.
At least you could turn that down. You know, at least they gave the option. And that's what I did as soon as I saw that effect. That option was I turned other player hit effects down to 25% and my own to 50.
Yeah.
And that kind of helped a little bit, especially since if you had them all the way up, it was the first time I even noticed it was when we were fighting a Great Azuchi, and I couldn't see the Great Azuchi because of all the effects.
Yeah, it's just one wall of random colors.
Yeah, so like there's all sorts of things. Like, so on the console side, I mean, I even pulled the reviews on console a while, not too long ago, but it was during the whole like everyone was making videos on overwhelmingly negative recent reviews on Steam. PlayStation's still sitting at 4.5 stars out of 5. Xbox is sitting at 4 stars out of 5. Like, console's not getting review bombed. And there's not like the muddying of the waters of this game is bad because it's bad versus this game, it has really shit performance and it's broken for PC players. The waters get muddy because people are like, you can't defend Wilds because the PC launch should work. And it's like, yeah, but that doesn't mean that the other criticisms are 100% objectively correct. You know, you can't lump them all together as if they are all in the same boat, like, because they're not. One of them doesn't affect the entirety of the player base. It only affects the PC audience. And not every PC person is facing the same problems. Some people are getting a little bit lucky. But, you know, it is unfortunate that they have to struggle in this manner, you know, especially for this long. And who knows if it's even going to be completely and utterly fixed for the PC audience. Like, that's the hardest part about it, is that's the part I would be frustrated about the most, is it ever actually going to be fixed? So,
yeah, something needs it's yeah, there's some pretty big structural changes I feel that would have to happen, but I don't know if the devs know how to fix it, you know, like,
yeah,
or have a route that they're going to correct things.
And it's like, sure, like if we could blame like shareholders and like suits, but at the end of the day, the suits weren't the ones who made the decision to not put any loading screens in the game. The suits weren't the ones who made the decision to like connect every single big map and make the maps even bigger and bigger and bigger than they already were before in previous titles.
I mean, it's the cost of ambition, because they've pushed the consoles to their limits before with other titles. They like doing that, but there's going to be a certain point where you can technically design a game to be really demanding, and the hardware is just not gonna keep up with it.
Yeah. And it feels like they hit their wall here. They hit their wall design wise.
Yeah. It's rough, and I mean, I hope it gets better, but only time will tell.
Yeah. Definitely, like, hopefully this will be the wake-up call. But my predictions for how things were gonna go years ago were wrong because of the way that they spun cells. I don't know what they're gonna do this time, and I don't know the results of everything. What I do know is that trend-wise, Rise was extremely hated, arguably just as much as Wilds was. And the rhetoric of it, nothing's going to save Rise, nothing's going to help it. Monster Hunter, as we know it, is dead. Existed during Rise, and now it's being looked upon favorably. And a lot of it is being to weaponize it against Wilds as well.
Yeah, I think it's... So, while I have said that there are trends with some of the discourse, or like they followed that similar talking points, the scale at which and the types of issues facing some of the modern titles are certainly substantially different. Like, you didn't get... So even with me transitioning, like, to try, yeah, you lost part of that bandwagon. Definitely negative try commentary didn't dominate the discourse in the same way.
Yeah.
And it could be partially because of the nature of the internet, but yeah, it certainly... Rise certainly got the brunt of it. And I mean, to some degree, still does have people who really don't like it.
Yeah. There's definitely been a cultural shift as far as like how the internet works as a whole, and the corporatization of YouTube doesn't help that, because now whatever is hitting the trends, that's what everyone is going to make content on. And we see that with like Wilds. We've seen a lot of like...
Well, it's the same thing with so have you... I don't know if you played Dragon's Dogma.
Yeah, I played Dragon's Dogma 2.
Did you play the first one?
I didn't play the first. I played a little bit of the first one, but by the time I was getting into it, Dragon's Dogma 2 had already come out, and I was like, okay, I'm playing.
So
2.
there was a controversy in Dragon's Dogma with monetizing of fairy stones, which is the fast travel. When one of the points in the game was to not fast travel, and that dominated the conversation. And I've still met people who think that that's like the biggest issue with Dragon's Dogma, when Dragon's Dogma 2, when the stability really is the biggest issue with Dragon's Dogma. It's the same thing with Wilds.
Yeah.
The stability, and I think like the lack of content. Like, I know people say Wild has a lack of content. Dragon's Dogma hasn't gotten a content update. And that's a big shame. But the talking point of the fairy stones, like the first game, if you followed the first game when it came out, there was monetization of all sorts of small things like that. And it wasn't that eventually all of the stuff that they monetized was just given out for free when they re-released the game and when Dark Arisen came out. And so players didn't have that like context to or at least all the new people starting Dragon's Dogma 2, because it was higher fidelity, didn't have the context to be like, okay, well, this is following trends and these are the actual issues. Like, not to say that monetizing and like having people pay for in-game stuff that has a gameplay effect is a great model. But it's not like, if you were going to complain about it, you should have complained about it in Dragon's Dogma 1. And like talk about it how it's a long-standing issue with the series, not a new issue with Dragon's Dogma 2.
Yeah, and that's one of my like viewpoints on the title update system, right? Like, we shouldn't congratulate them for one entry whenever it's problematic in every single entry. And it has, like, while people are tired of it right now, we talked about it earlier, like the launch experience is not even close to the end of the title update cycle experience. And that's like disappointing for especially like me with Iceborne. Like the shitty guiding lands, the shitty Clutch Claw. Not that Clutch Claw got that much better, but before buffs and Shaver Jewel, that will forever be my Iceborne experience. You know, like
yeah. I mean, it's eaten up a good chunk of my time too. The flaws in the games as they're rolling things out, and it, like we talk about, oh well, people were onboarded afterwards. Yeah, there are some people who still haven't, like, I still have friends who haven't come back to World because of the failures, like, or like the things that weren't particularly great about it.
Yeah.
That haven't come back to the Monsterhunter series. I know some people who haven't like touched it because the end game sucked in base world.
Yeah. It's like, oh, it's better now, I promise. Like, come on.
I'm like
the anomaly system with Sunbreak was
I understand
a lot of
that people are being like, yeah, again, I understand that people are being vocal about it now in terms of like, hey, I'm leaving because this sucks. And I'm sure like for some different groups, for like speed running in particular, like, yeah, they're facing unique challenges now that they weren't facing before. And it really does suck for them.
Yeah, I get their problem. Like, out of anybody that has like problems with the core gameplay of Wilds, like they're justified the most in my opinion.
Because usually that's like, it's been a long-standing. I talked about it before. There's been speedrunning subculture in Monster Hunter since at least 2006, and it felt for a while that they would lean into that subculture too. The fact that there isn't being more done to address that, and the fact that there could be some really simple changes that would fix things, is a little saddening. Like, I wish they would roll out. So one of the things that would help is if they started rolling out smaller updates instead of waiting for a big title update to push out a number of changes based on feedback. But I don't know. I'm not sure if we'll get there. It's not to say that they don't do bug fixes, because they do, and they're better at that than some other companies. But
yeah. And you know what? At least in some ways, they're getting better about communicating and like showing their hand a little more.
Oh yeah, no, especially by comparison to like the gap between Rise and Sunbreak.
Yeah, I mean, like they've turned it up with the like guild reports and everything, and showing the roadmap put me at ease, because you know I was a little worried that we were going to get Rise 2.0, except this time with even less in the first two title updates. You know, like that's what I was concerned about. But you know, at least they're showing their hand some. At least they have like the foresight to understand that would be a good thing to do.
Yeah. And did you see the post that they made with the future content from now? Like the future title updates. The
extra roadmap, because I've seen like two different roadmaps.
Because there's one that's talking about the December stuff.
Yeah. That's title update 4.
Yeah, it's nice to have a little bit more on those than what we've had in the last couple of posts.
Yeah.
Because I think again, showing their hand more does help alleviate some anxiety on that end, because when you don't know what's coming, like, I mean, I understand wanting them to have some sort of surprise element, you know, for players, but not knowing whether or not Lagiacrus was going to be really the only thing in this last title update was a little...
It was nerve-wracking.
A little much, I think. Yeah.
And it's like, it's one thing to surprise, and it's another thing to like go ahead and set expectations early and go ahead and foster goodwill by showing your hand and being like, we do have future plans. Because right now they don't have like the goodwill. They're taking forever to do things. There's some stuff that's unacceptable. You know, like they're just kind of like running amok with negative feedback and reception right now.
Yeah, and it's I think one of the things that is smart of them to do is to make the ATs more accessible.
Yeah.
In terms of like being around more.
I'm glad they're doing that.
I don't necessarily think that they have to have each one available all the time in the way that they have, but I will gladly take that over fairly long stretches of not having access to those, because like that's the type of content that people like to perfect, and that usually players will spend a good chunk of time doing. Again, the 3 event thing is just a bit too slow, and it's a bit too not particularly substantial.
Yeah. Well, we've been on Wilds for a bit. Let's let's finish up this.
We might be able to wrap up this video.
Yeah.
The reason I'm not making videos for 3 Ultimate is that they aren't needed. Who needs a guide for a monster when you have a slime weapon, 2 AI comrades who also use slime weapons, and have armor made from diamond-crusted titanium? In Freedom 1, there's a quest called Thunder and Lightning. It's a dual G-rank Kirin in the battleground. With the best gear in the game and the best weapon for the job, it's still difficult for an experienced player to clear the quest in the time solo. It's one of many very difficult quests which takes advantage of the better gear you can make. In 3 Ultimate, I played to G-rank in stock low-rank armor with no charm, not because I'm MLG Pro MH, but because it's so simple. The better gear isn't there.
Isn't he MLG Pro at MH though? As a speedrunner?
I mean, I think the thing he was bringing up was like he wasn't doing it for clout.
It's like it's.
Yeah. I mean, he's certainly better at the game, I think, than most players were at the time, for sure.
Yeah.
There to help you clear hard quests. It's there as a set of brass knuckles to help you pummel the game into submission while it's got one hand tied behind its back. Yes, there are some DLC quests in 3U that are very challenging compared to the base content, just as there were in previous games. But to use that as a rebuttal for all my points is to ignore that the core game is much easier. That was a pretty lengthy setup, but the point is this. The balancing failings in 3rd generation Monster Hunter, especially 3 Ultimate, so overpower the player on top of the already raised damage output that when combined with the lower damage the player takes, the core of the game is significantly diluted. This is the case without using the overpowered gear, but with it, it's even more exacerbated. Monster Hunter is still a fun social action game, but it's not the same game it used to be. With the challenges to the game's mechanics, the addition of the stamina system and other tweaks that have made it more accessible, so much less is required from the player now that the core of the game is diluted. With both the requirements for success and the penalties for failure changed compared to 1st and 2nd generation games, much of what made the game great has been lost. If you only ever play to muck around with your friends or to collect armor, you'll find not much has changed that you care about. If you played because you love the challenge of putting yourself against a huge creature and relying on your skills, you'll find it's not quite the same. This is why I think Monster Hunter has lost its charm. Yes, it's more accessible now and it's more popular in the West. Yes, there are a swathe of new players online, all boosted to G-rank, running around with Brachydios weapons and mismatched sets with only the auto guard skill to go on the dual swords. Yes, more people have heard about Monster Hunter, and yes, it's finally getting critical acclaim from IGN, who are saying thanks for including lock-on, now can we get rid of those potion flexes? But now, you'll never again know the agony and triumph of beating a truly challenging quest by the skin of your teeth on your 3rd life. Was it worth it?
I love the comments about potion flexes. Yeah, those might be gone now.
Yeah, that's certainly like funny looking back on it.
Again, it's interesting where people draw the line on, okay, this is too much. For Maze, yeah, that 3rd gen was
too much. Yeah,
was too much.
Because the exact scenario that he painted is the exact scenario that I've seen World fans paint that Wild players will never experience, and Rise players will never experience.
Yeah, it's this building up of things, obviously, that the whoever's making that argument really likes is being like the end all be all, and then the things that they don't like being like the worst case scenario.
I like the like core like final statement of, yeah, it's more popular than ever, but we'll never get that exhilaration again. Was it worth it? Was it worth it for the popularity?
Yeah, he's like me. Yeah.
Echoed every single generation now.
Yeah, players getting too powerful. We'll never have a hard hunt ever again.
It sucks now. It sucks now.
I think there's been a number of times where they've had hunts that'll push the whatever skill sets they're trying to have the player learn. Like they'll push the players to get to a point where they're comfortable with everything. I mean, just look at again like Fatalis or the Deviants.
Special investigations or just high anomaly in general.
140 quests.
True guild quests. The concept of Japan, a lot of Japanese fans getting mad at 4G because of the difficulty gap between 4 and 4G.
Yeah.
In fact, I did some digging on that whenever I saw, I think it was Ludi that mentioned it, and I found a 10-year-old Gaijin Hunter Tumblr post that literally was calling people, like the people review bombing Monster Hunter 4G on Amazon, whiners and babies. He's calling them, and this is a mild-mannered Gaijin Hunter now, calling them whiners and babies.
I mean, yeah, wow. He must have been, I think Gaijin started making content around then too.
Yeah, I actually found his first like voiced video, and it was about the Rathalos G rank charm grind in 4G.
Yeah, because I remember him back in the day. He used to, I think, take out like a phone camera and place it in front of his his 3DS. Man, I give major props to all the old guide makers. It's a good time. I mean, Maze was one of them. I appreciated them. They were great along my own personal Monster Hunter journey too.
Well, Alpha, this video in and of itself was a journey, man.
No, it's an interesting watch, and yeah, we definitely got a lot of talking on. For sure.
Fireside chats with an old head and a new head. Oh man,
yeah, good time.
Yeah, definitely. It's been fun, man. I appreciate you doing this with me. I appreciate you talking so much with me.
Oh yeah, no problem. I'm always down.
Ooh, I think this is a good spot to end the video. Do you have any closing statements?
Off the top of my head, not really. It's so again, for those of you looking to delve into older Monster Hunter, yeah, mess around with things and be creative. Don't assume things are going to be the same between games. And for those of you who are pessimistic about new Monster Hunter, there was a time where somebody was pessimistic about old Monster Hunter when it was new Monster Hunter. So you're in good company.
And that was all for this series. Big thanks to MH United, aka Alpha, for hopping on and talking with me for such a long amount of time. It was certainly a very enlightening and fun discussion. Also, another shout out to Mazereon. Mazereon actually commented on the first video, and you know, it's not like we went hard on his video or anything. For its time, it was a very excellent and well-made video, and a lot of things that he hit were things that were legitimate criticisms of the games after 2nd gen. So big shout out to Mazereon. Took it like a champ. Great sport. Just an absolute class act. Hey, appreciate it, Maze. On to membership shoutouts. Thank you guys for supporting me. To my meatballs, to my bacon bits, I still got Terry Bull, the lone meatball, holding it down over there. And then I've got another special thanks to my big boys, the filet mignon and the head chefs. We got Akir, Funalos, Monster Hunter, Sepher Short, Mr. MH, El Mango. Thank each and every one of my supporters. You guys really do take the monthly stress of bills and cat food and cat litter and everything like that. You guys help me out a little bit. I appreciate it very much. I just want you guys to know that. Stay tuned. We got more stuff coming for the channel. We actually got a video about 4U coming up next. Thank each and every one of you for watching, and stay meaty, my friends.
I've got dinner ready. Let him